What's going on, guys? It's Greg, and I just want to talk to you guys today about different types of nuclear attacks that you could potentially face. Um, so let's just get right into it. This is part one of the nuclear attack survival series. I'm going to go into all the different types of attacks that you may have to deal with as a citizen of the United States. So let's just get started. So I made this little board here, and actually let me just fix something real quick. Sorry about that. Okay, so we got two types of attacks that you guys got to keep in mind. All right, we got bombs and missiles, which are usually, when you think of like Russia, China, the United States, we have nuclear bombs. Think about the A bomb that was dropped in Hiroshima. Think about the H bomb. That's a bomb, a typical nuclear bomb that's manufactured or mass-produced by a country, by a superpower. That's what we're thinking of here. And then there's two types. There's strategic, and then there's tactical. Strategic weapons are going to be like your ICBMs, something like North Korea was testing. But typically when we talk about strategic weapons, we're talking about long-range attacks between superpowers. So that would be like your World War III nuclear war type scenario, like USA versus Russia, or your Cold War scenario turning hot, Cuban Missile Crisis turning hot. That would be strategic weapons would be used in that type of a war. A strategic weapon is typically like an ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile. ICBMs are typically strategic weapons. Some other strategic weapons would be any type of nuclear bomb that's dropped from a strategic bomber. So typical strategic bombers that are used by the United States is the B-2 stealth bomber and the B-52 Stratofortress. Those are strategic bomber planes that can carry heavy payloads, which, nuclear bombs are heavy, and they can travel very long distances to deliver a strategic bomb over strategic targets, and then also under strategic would be SLBMs, submarine launched ballistic missiles. So typically like a SLBM is basically you have nuclear submarines that are powered by nuclear reactors, and they can travel across the oceans, and they have bays inside of them, typically maybe 10 to 20 bays, and they can launch strategic missiles out of the submarine, which typically, I don't know I think Russia may have one or two of them, but the United States is the country that primarily has submarine launched ballistic missiles. France has some. France has a few. The UK has some as well. I'm going to go more into that in a different video. We're going to go into the different delivery systems. But for now, just know that there's strategic weapons and tactical weapons. Tactical weapons is anything that's like shorter range, and the targets are not designed to attack larger scale targets. Tactical is typically shorter range, and it's intended for smaller targets that are we're not talking about like entire cities or something like that. Tactical nuclear exchanges would potentially occur if there was like a altercation in Europe. Potentially like Russia and European countries could exchange some small yield nuclear weapons. They're not going to they may not go full nuclear. They're going to use tactical nukes in that situation, because they don't want to escalate it into a full-scale nuclear war. So there may be like a limited exchange with small yield weapons at short ranges. Tactical weapons are typically used on the battlefield. You could even consider some tank shells that contain tank shells and short range missiles that contain small warheads are considered tactical weapons. So, for let's see, an example of like a tactical missile would be like a Russian Iskander. Russian Iskander is like a short-range ballistic missile, and it has could put nuclear tips on there, you know, so that would be a tactical. And then we're moving along to INDs, which is improvised nuclear devices. That's going to be your dirty bombs, which is also called a radiological dispersion device. And then you have your illicit weapons. So, the dirty bomb, I'm not going to really get too into it because I'm sure everybody knows what that is. But basically the IND, the dirty bomb is basically just, a chemical explosion, any type of improvised explosive, and there's some type of radiological material that's highly radioactive, and it's placed on the outside of the device, so when it explodes it spreads all of the radiation everywhere. So that's one threat. And then more dangerous than a dirty bomb, dirty bombs are obviously dangerous, but I would say more dangerous than them, much more dangerous, is an illicit weapon. So an illicit weapon would be like let's say like a terrorist group, if they were able to get their hands on enriched uranium and they attempted to build like a crude nuclear device, and then if they tried to smuggle it into the United States through shipping ports, so like one of the things they could do, like let's say ISIS or somebody like that, or even North Korea, they could, or something, they could improvise, they could make an improvised nuclear device if they were able to get their hands on some enriched uranium, and then they can make like a very crude nuclear bomb, and then they could put it like in a shipping container, and then detonate it when it gets into the port, or they could put it on a truck and they can drive it into a city and detonate it as well, like they could put it in like a moving truck and then detonate it, so there's a lot of things that they could do with that. So the illicit weapons are much more dangerous. They could also be stolen weapons. If a terrorist gets their hands on like a nuclear weapon that they stole, that would also be considered an illicit weapon, which is also dangerous. Some considerations for the INDs is that your illicit weapons are going to be much more dangerous than the dirty bombs. And also illicit weapons generally have a lot more fallout than standard nuclear weapons do, and they tend to be much more dirtier, just because the lower quality of the fission reaction or the fusion react. Typically, it's going to be a fission bomb, and it's going to be a poorly designed crude weapon, and there's going to be a lot of incomplete reactions taking place, and that's going to create a lot of the highly radioactive byproducts of the fission reaction, which in a normal bomb they're still there, but because they get consumed during the explosion, there's not as much of it. So your illicit weapon will have a much higher fallout than a standard weapon of the same size. So if you have like let's say like a 500-pound or like a 5-kiloton illicit weapon versus a 5-kiloton professionally designed weapon by the US or something, or UK or whatever, it's going to be much more dirtier. And the illicit bomb is also going to have more fallout because it's going to be detonated at the ground level. Typically, like I said, the terrorist would, let's say, put it in like a Ryder truck and then drive it like into Times Square or something, and then they could detonate it. Once they detonate it at the ground level, it's going to irradiate all the materials in the area where it explodes, because it's going to be close to the ground. It's going to explode and it's going to irradiate everything. Everything's going to turn to ash and it's going to be sent up into the air, and then it's going to fall down later on as fallout. So your illicit weapons are going to have more fallout, and they're going to have incomplete fission, which is going to mean that they're much more dangerous, more radioactive. So that's basically it. Those are your two main categories of weapons. So you got your bombs and missiles created professionally by superpowers of the world. Then you have your improvised weapons, improvised nuclear devices, INDs, and it's typically going to be your dirty bomb or RDD, radiological dispersion device, and then your illicit weapons, which are just nukes that are crudely manufactured using any kind of enriched uranium that somebody was able to obtain or some terrorist group obtained and put together a device, a nuclear weapon, or it could be a stolen weapon or something like that. All right. So join me in part 2. I'm going to go over basic principles that you need to know for any type of nuclear situation, whether it's a nuclear attack or a nuclear disaster, radiological situation. I'm going to go over basic concepts that you should know. But with this series, I'm focusing on nuclear attacks, so I'm going to gear it more towards attacks. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 2. You can click on the bottom of the screen. If you click on the bottom of the screen, it'll take you right to part 2. Thanks.